Conclusions are going to be the final paragraph in your essay, and they are often overlooked or mistaken for a simple reiteration of the thesis or the introduction, and while the conclusion definitely addresses the material you've already discussed in your essay, because it's really the conclusion's job to wrap up everything that you've discussed, its ultimate purpose is much more important than just a summary. So if we remember our cylinder from our previous video on the body paragraphs, we remember that the thesis serves as the circle on top that dictates the boundaries for your essay. It tells you how far you are going to reach with your body paragraphs. Next, your body paragraphs delve deeper into this thesis, but really they're kind of cut off right here. They delve deeper, but they're all focusing on one specific part of your thesis. They're all trying to prove different parts of your argument. So finally, this conclusion is going to further enrich your argument, to take your argument to an even deeper level, as it will take into account all the different components of your essay. If you remember, we've been talking a lot about the general to specific model throughout the essay. Off in an introduction, in a thesis, in a body paragraph, you always want to be moving from general to specific. However, I'm going to flip your world upside down right now by saying that in a conclusion, you want to go from specific to general. You've already narrowed in on all the different elements of your argument presented in your thesis or your topic statement, and now you want to take a step back in your conclusion and survey your topic from a more holistic perspective. Keeping that in mind, the conclusion serves a few general purposes. Firstly, it ties back to the thesis statement. Remember how everything comes back to the thesis? That also applies for the conclusion, and it stresses the significance of your initial argument. Second, it's going to tie the different components of your essay together and hopefully give your essay a sense of completion. This might include kind of a quick summary of your points, and this is where a lot of people stop in their conclusion. They say, I've summarized what I've said in my essay, and now I'm going to be done and just turn this in. Well, you could do that, but the way to create a much stronger essay would be to go to this next step, which would be synthesizing. Essentially, it is creating a new meaning, and what I was talking about, taking a step back and offering a new perspective on the essay as a whole. And this all kind of leads back to answering a basic question. So what? So this question is found scribbled on many an AP language essay in the class that I took, because my teacher wanted us as writers to seriously consider the reason we were writing this essay. This so what means, why should the reader care about your essay? What is the ultimate point of writing your essay? What are you trying to get across? And sometimes the writer does not even know the answer to this. So it's a very important question to not just be asking yourself for your conclusion, but also it's a question that you should be asking yourself throughout your entire essay. The intro, the thesis, the body paragraphs. So when we talked about the analysis, your analysis is really centered around this question, and it kind of relates back to those: what is my purpose, who is my audience, and why am I writing this questions? Those are all encompassed in this big so what. Of course, if you're going to ask yourself so what in all of these other components of the essay, the conclusion, the part that wraps it all up, is going to be one of the most important parts to discuss the deeper meaning. In general, asking yourself this question is a very good way to focus your essay on what is truly critical to your argument. We'll be talking a lot more about this throughout the AP Language and AP Literature videos, particularly when it comes to analysis. So now that we've covered kind of a basic idea of what synthesis means, and it doesn't mean summarizing, it means creating a new meaning, the next purpose of the conclusion is to leave a strong impression. And it goes back to that saying that people remember the beginning and the ending of things most vividly. In a basketball game, you can screw up as many times as you want. Well, maybe not, but you can screw up in the middle of the game, and if you make the game-winning shot, everyone seems to forget about your previous failures. And it's just kind of the way it works. Not to say that your body paragraphs aren't vital to your essay. It's just that you want to start off with a forceful introduction of your topic, hence the importance of the thesis statement, and the goal with the conclusion is to leave a strong impression on your reader. Of course, leaving a strong impression is much easier said than done. That's why when you finish a great book, you close the book, but you don't necessarily leave the story. Oftentimes, you'll feel still attached to the characters in the story, and that's what really makes a good conclusion. And it applies to any kind of writing, writing historical papers, writing fiction, writing nonfiction. So there is no strict guideline to writing a conclusion that will somehow evoke a strong response. However, there are some models that can help you get started if you're feeling lost and not sure how to go about starting your conclusion. Here I'm going to discuss a few basic models. Not this kind of model, though that could be a whole nother video. We're going to focus on the writing kind of models. So the first kind of structure for a conclusion is called the horizon technique. And why it's called the horizon technique, I don't even know if that's the official term for it. It's just a term that can help encompass what this general conclusion structure looks like. So the horizon technique, this is more of the specific to general outlook. If you have zeroed in on one issue for your entire paper, then this is your opportunity to broaden the perspective. It can introduce a philosophical or political issue, it can pose a challenging question, or it can encourage the reader to look into the future, and a myriad of other things. Right now, I'm going to give an example of a conclusion from a literary essay, but really this model is the most general, basic model for writing conclusions. I wrote an essay in AP language that asked to compare two different passages discussing the launch of Sputnik. I first start off, and this perhaps would be a bit of my summary piece, where I recap kind of the passage that I was given and how I discussed it. So, as both authors pose differing views of the same achievement, and now I get into a broader meaning. It becomes apparent that mankind will always be caught up in futile conflict. No matter the transcendent quality of an achievement, it is the nature of mankind to diminish accomplishments and drown their significances in ultimately petty quarrels. This conclusion is perhaps a little bit short, a little bit rough. It is an example of an in-class essay conclusion. So a lot of people think that on in-class essays, and we'll cover this more in the AP videos as well, but a lot of people think that, oh, there's not enough time, just write a sentence and that restates my thesis and I'll be good. And that sometimes works on in-class essays. But the way to really leave a lasting impression is to take what you've discussed your entire essay, and it's like you're zooming out, and that's presumably why it's called the horizon technique. It's because you're looking at the entire essay as a whole from a much broader perspective. Again, this kind of structure for a conclusion is the most common in high school because it's so broad and open-ended that the general structure can be used in many, many different types of essays, and it's definitely a good way to get started. The next technique that can be used in writing a conclusion, I'll refer to it as the circle technique. And in a circle technique, your conclusion will come back to a theme introduced in the beginning of your essay to make it come full circle, hence the circle technique. So I'm going to use an example from my college essay. Not to say that it is the best college essay in the world, but I do use this technique, and notice how there's a certain kind of repetition of imagery as I move from my introduction to my conclusion. So in my introduction, I have a nice little circle graphic here. In my introduction, I wrote, "My identity used to revolve around one mental image, a small yellow ball springing off an aluminum bat hurtling towards me. I was a shortstop, a softball player, an athlete. This past year, I realized that this narrow view prevented me from exploring who I truly am." And now, in my essay, I would go on to discuss, why my identity revolves so strongly around this image of myself as an athlete, and then it would, throughout the body paragraphs, perhaps reveal a moment in which I transitioned from realizing that this narrow definition of self had hindered my ability to explore my full identity. Well, in my conclusion, I've probably, as I did in my essay, already discussed all this transformation. So my conclusion would somehow evoke images from the introduction, but also progress forward and reveal my ultimate transformation. So my conclusion might read, "Recently, I found myself back on the softball diamond. However, this time, the pitcher was in 7th grade, and I stood not at shortstop, but in the coach's box. On the sidelines, the girls and I discuss favorite books and upcoming birthday parties. I hope to help them find a place for softball that fits into but does not swallow their lives. Because if there's anything I've learned, it is that my failure to let a little ball define me was really my greatest success." Here, my conclusion parallels my introduction with this image of the ball and being at shortstop, but it also shows a change. It shows progression and transformation as a college essay might hope to do. The final conclusion model that I'm going to talk about is a call to action. This is popular with argumentative essays and is seen throughout many different speeches and sermons and other orations of sorts. I'm going to share a conclusion from one of Toussaint Louverture's speeches. This was from 1801, and it's a proclamation to his soldiers. There he is on his horse. He says, "Brave military personnel, generals, officers, non-commissioned officers, and soldiers, do not listen to the evil ones who ask nothing better than to do you harm in order to have a pretext to dishonor you. Attached to the soil of this country, unite yourselves with your chief to render it fruitful and to preserve it in its current state of prosperity. Ever on the path of honor, I will show you the route you must follow. You are soldiers. You must be faithful observers of the subordination and military virtues, and must vanquish or die at your posts." So here, because it's a speech, he's directly referring to his soldiers, to an audience, but it's a dramatic version of an essay, really, because he is presenting an argument, and with this call to action model, you are reaching out to your audience, not necessarily using the second person. You wouldn't necessarily say, reader, go and do this, but it is more directed outward at the audience. So here he is appealing to the emotions. He's using pathos to instill this sense of honor and courage into his soldiers. And that is often the same kind of appeal you would want to use in an argumentative essay conclusion, where you're trying to bring about some kind of change, either tangible change or even a change in the reader's thinking. I'm only going to cover these 3 general models for a conclusion, but there are so many different types of conclusions that I couldn't even start to cover all of them. Of course, a history essay will conclude differently than a fictional conclusion, and even those within their own branch, those can vary. But Again, these basic videos are just meant to get you started, and as you become more comfortable, it's perfectly acceptable to experiment with different kinds of writing styles, of conclusions. That's part of the fun, when you get used to the basic structure and you start to push the boundaries of your comfort and see which styles are effective and which styles perhaps leave something to be desired. And with that, we're going to move to a recap of conclusions. One of the most important things to remember about concluding is that you can think of your conclusion as an opportunity to extend your knowledge of one topic so that it has a broader significance. You might not actually want to just increase the space between your letters, because I don't think that teachers would necessarily appreciate that. But broadening the perspective and stepping back and looking at your topic from a new angle, I think that definitely will be appreciated. Finally, to go over the purposes of conclusion. Firstly, your conclusion should, unlike the rest of your essay, transition from a focus on your specific topic to a more general application of what you're discussing. Secondly, it should tie back to the thesis, as does everything in your essay. Third, it should wrap up your essay and tie together all the different components, and ultimately create a sense of completion in your essay. Fourth, and perhaps the most important part of any conclusion, is to create some kind of new meaning. This is again the stepping back and looking at your essay from a new perspective, or with the circle it would be showing some kind of progress or making some kind of call to action. 5, your conclusion should leave an impression on the reader. And that's it for the recap. Oftentimes the conclusion is tacked on to the essay as a final thought, but strong essays will also have strong conclusions because they reveal the overarching purpose of the essay. And that should do it for our video on conclusions. Again, I hope this was helpful, and none of these suggestions are set in stone. They're merely guidelines to help you through an essay. And with the conclusion of our conclusion video comes the conclusion of our video series on the basic essay. Next up, I'll be making videos on AP Language and Composition and AP Literature. So if you're wondering about any of those essays or are feeling stuck in either of those classes, keep an eye out for those videos, and hopefully they will help as well. Thanks for watching.